This video is on writing an effective introduction. And look at it. It might sound cheesy, it might look cheesy, but you see the man over there going, "Tell me more." That's what you want your readers to do. You want them to be hooked from the very beginning. And I know you've been told this through middle school and high school, probably even since elementary. But how do you do it? How do you grab the attention of people who may be reluctantly reading it, but maybe I'm giving them a quiz on it? How do you entice them to read? Well, there are several ways that you can do it. But let's start by talking about what an introduction does, what its purpose is, why we need to have one in our essays. The beginning of a story is called a lead. It can be one sentence or a few sentences long. A good beginning leads readers into the story and makes them want to find out more. It catches their attention, enticing them to continue reading. A good lead adds to your voice and helps your reader connect with you. Your words can incite excitement, sadness, mystery, fear, or any other emotion. Not every type of lead will work for every writer or for every piece of writing. First, you will have to experiment with them. Regardless of the type you choose, make sure your lead is at least 3 sentences long. Now, remember, this is also in your introduction. The last sentence should be your thesis with your main points. This is one way you can start with one or more questions that grab the reader's attention. For example, have you ever wondered what it would be like to travel among the stars or ride in a space shuttle and be a part of NASA's famous astronaut team? Perhaps young people could make their dreams come true, just like a girl from California did in 1977. This famous astronaut's name is Sally Ride. So, asking a question, getting the reader involved from the very beginning, but not asking them something like, "Do you want to be an astronaut?" Come on. But to tell them about somebody who probably people didn't think would ever do anything like that, um, she did it. So perhaps you can do it too. See, not everybody in California wants to be a movie star. All right, another way that you might want to start is with startling statistic or fact. I've got all of these over here. Like 1 in 3 people will die of COVID in the next 10 seconds. Something like that. That would get well, that would actually get my attention in the worst way possible. But start out with something that grabs the person's attention. Avoid starting out with boring lines like, "In this essay, I will explain why Rosa Parks was an important figure." Let's take first person out altogether. I. Now, with that, if you go back to the previous one, have you ever wondered? I really don't like second person, but if you're starting with a question, that's fine. I don't want you to use first person. Please stop. In elementary school, my students didn't do this in middle school. I cut it real quick when I gave them a 0 on their essay. Um, don't say, "I'm going to explain." Well, duh, your name is on the paper. Who do I think is doing this? Did you plagiarize it? Would you admit it if you did? I don't need for you to put first person in there. So just don't say, "In this essay, I will explain why Rosa Parks was an important figure," blah, 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 blah. That does not get my attention. Try something like this. A Michigan museum recently paid $492,000 for an old dilapidated bus for Montgomery, Alabama. And then you would launch into why it was significant. Why would somebody want to buy a bus for what they could buy a nice house for, especially in Texas. So tell me more. I want to know what's is it the magic school bus? What is it? And then you would launch into the story of Rosa Parks, who did not give up her seat on the bus back in the year I was born, actually. So the second sentence sounds more interesting, does it not? It would encourage most people to keep on reading. So that's a startling statistic or a fact. Okay, a quote from an expert in the field or experienced person. And I know that you're doing this in the body of your paper, but it also is a great way to start out an essay. Quote, our future lies with today's kids and tomorrow's space exploration, said Sally Ride, one of the most famous women astronauts of the 20th century. Not only has Ride spent her career traveling the stars, but she has dedicated her life to helping students become future explorers by teaching them about space. So here we go with a quote from Sally Ride herself. Here's another one. Quote, people always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired. I'm sorry. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not physically tired, but I was only tired of giving in, end quote, said Rosa Parks when asked about her historic act of defiance that changed the face of America forever. So the first one, of course, would work for a paper on Sally Ride and all of the contributions she's made to the world of science and to education. And this one here would be a good one on Rosa Parks in talking about civil rights and how, of course, this happened before the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, but still at the same time, it does show a real struggle and discrimination against Black people back in the 50s. So both of those are very good, and they're quotes, and they don't have to actually be by the person that you're writing about. I don't think you're going to quote JonBenét Ramsey. I don't know, but maybe you would start out with a quote from her brother or her parents or well, you can't find the intruder, so that's really not funny, but start it with somebody who was close to the investigation, who has credibility, who has ethos. Okay. So that's a quote from an expert in the field. Or a short anecdote. Now, I say that it's almost redundant because an anecdote is a short story. So look at it as a short story because you don't want it to take up several paragraphs. In fact, you only want it to take up maybe 3 or 4 sentences. So this actually is in second person. But again, if you're using it as a lead, I don't care. Imagine being such a good tennis player that you win a school scholarship to play. Imagine dropping out of college to pursue a career in professional tennis. Imagine being this good at one thing, then tackling another career too. That is exactly what a young girl named Sally Ride did. Although she started on the road to being a tennis pro, Sally soon realized that her true calling was in astrophysics, as she would become one of today's most famous women astronauts. All right, several things in this one. And it does engage. Imagine, the subject of imagine is you. You understood. You imagine being this. You imagine. This person also used repetition, which you see a lot in fiction. You see it a lot in songs, words, or phrase and poetry. And there's an effect. It's an effect. It's called parallelism. And it's also getting the person engaged. So imagine this, imagine that, imagine that. And it makes you sit up and notice, well, what am I supposed to imagine next? Oh, no, nothing, because then it explains what it's talking about, why it's telling me that. because it's getting ready to tell me about a lady named Sally Ride, who was very good at tennis but became an astronaut instead. All right, so those are your four different lead ins. So here's the purpose. You can start with one or more questions. You can start with a startling statistic or fact. This actually has fact and statistic in it because it's a fact that the museum paid that, and the statistic is the amount they paid. This one is a quote, could be a quote. You're not doing a biography, so I don't think you would be using that person, but you could definitely use investigators, detectives, FBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, somebody who's in there. So as you're looking through these news sources, see if you can maybe pull out some quotes that you could, or a quote you could start with to get us into your theory of what happened. And then the short anecdote. You just have to make sure it's not way too long. In fact, they could have just launched into at the bottom, and she would become one of the famous women astronauts today. This, and then you might in the next sentence talk about that's your thesis, that she would become one of the most famous women astronauts. How did she do that? Well, you do three different ways. You might talk about her early education, and you might talk about when she made the switch from playing tennis to going to NASA, and then you might talk about how she's educating children on space. That's it. Over and out.